buckle up, folks, because we are going deep on this one.
Into burning women, widows, witches, and early modern European travelers in India.
By Pompa Banerjee.
That's right.
Yeah. So this book, it's going to kind of turn everything you thought you knew about history and culture upside down.
Absolutely.
And this whole idea of perspective.
Yeah. And what Banerjee does, she brings these two worlds together.
Right.
16th to 18th century European travelers who are going to India and all this anxiety that's happening back in Europe at the same time.
It's almost like she finds this like hidden connection between widow burning in India, Sati, and then the witch trials and this fear of women back in Europe.
Exactly.
It's really unsettling.
It is.
When you think about it, how these travelers are looking at this practice that's so foreign.
Right.
And they're seeing their own fears.
Reflected right back at them.
Yeah.
And, the book really digs into the psychology behind these encounters. So you've got these travelers, right? They're going into this whole new land.
Right.
Trying to understand something that is totally outside of their experience.
Of course.
And they're using their own cultural baggage to try to make sense of it.
So their own lens.
Exactly. And their own lens is like distorted. It's clouded by this deep-seated fear of women.
Okay.
Especially women who are challenging the norms.
And it makes sense when you think about the context.
Exactly.
Back in Europe at this time. If a woman was outspoken or independent.
Yeah.
They were often labeled as a witch or even worse.
Right. It was dangerous to be a woman who was outside of the lines.
Yeah. And it's kind of chilling to think about how those fears were projected onto the Sati ritual.
Right. You've got these travelers who are looking at these widows who are choosing to burn themselves on their husband's pyre.
Right.
And they're seeing that as the ultimate transgression.
Like the ultimate rule breaking.
Totally. She's choosing death over life. She's defying the patriarchy. And she's doing it in this really public and dramatic way.
So how did these travelers make sense of all of this?
That's the question.
Because they were writing these travelogues. They were claiming to be eyewitnesses.
Well, claiming to have the truth.
The truth about India.
Yeah.
The exotic East.
Exactly. But, Banerjee cautions us about just taking these accounts as fact.
Okay.
A lot of them were borrowing from each other, repeating myths, and they were more concerned with selling books than with, historical accuracy.
So like a 16th century version of clickbait.
Yeah, totally. Sensationalism sells.
Right. They were feeding this European fascination.
Yeah.
With the exotic and the dangerous East.
Yeah.
And Sati.
Yeah.
With his ritualistic fire and the widow's self-sacrifice.
Yeah.
It was like the perfect story.
Absolutely a bestseller.
Yeah.
For sure.
16th century bestseller.
Yeah, take Edward Terry, for example.
Okay.
His travelogue went through so many revisions and additions that the printer had to apologize for how long it was.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Terry, he insisted that he was a historian.
Okay.
Not some romance novelist.
Uh-huh.
But the way he embellished these stories says otherwise.
It makes you think, were they more interested in creating this spectacle than really trying to understand what was going on?
Exactly. Banerjee argues that they were projecting their own anxieties onto this foreign ritual.
Okay.
They were trying to fit a square peg into a round hole, basically. Like trying to force Sati into their own understanding.
And a big part of that understanding was tied to the idea of witchcraft.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
We see that over and over again.
All the time.
In their accounts.
Yeah.
Describing it as demonic. The widows as possessed.
Right.
Like they're watching some kind of black magic ceremony.
And it's not just the travelers from regions where the witch hunts were common.
Okay.
Even travelers from areas where witchcraft wasn't really a big thing.
Yeah.
They still use this language.
So it's like this universal...
Yeah, it was like a convenient explanation for something that they found deeply disturbing.
So they use witchcraft as a way to distance themselves.
Exactly.
From Sati, to make it seem even more foreign.
Yeah. More other.
More other.
And therefore less threatening to their own worldview.
So they could condemn it without having to really confront what it meant.
And it allowed them to reinforce this idea of European superiority.
Right. We are rational.
Uh-huh.
And they are superstitious and barbaric.
Exactly.
But this fear of women.
Yeah.
This need to control them, to categorize them, it went beyond just witchcraft.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Banerjee points out that European society at that time was obsessed with this idea of the disorderly woman.
Okay.
Any woman who deviated from the norm.
From the expectations.
Yeah, like obedience, submissiveness, piety.
Right.
She was seen as a threat to the social order.
A threat.
A threat.
Right, and that fear, it kind of manifested itself in a lot of different ways. From the witch hunts to these very strict social codes that were outlined in these conduct books.
Exactly. Conduct books were basically guides for how women should behave.
Like the rules.
Yeah, how to be the ideal wife, daughter, and mother.
Okay.
And they emphasized obedience to male authority.
Okay.
Self-sacrifice and silence.
It's interesting because those themes, in kind of a twisted way, echo some aspects of Sati.
Right.
Even though the contexts are totally different.
Yeah, totally different motivations.
Right.
But there are these interesting parallels.
And that's where this whole poisoned husband narrative comes in.
Oh, yeah.
Some travelers actually claimed that Sati was a way to prevent wives from poisoning their husbands.
Right, like a preventative measure.
It's like, okay, if you're worried about your wife poisoning you, well,
this is the solution.
This will take care of it?
Yeah.
But there's absolutely no evidence for this.
No, not in Indian traditions or legal records.
So where did it come from?
It's a complete fabrication. But it speaks volumes about the anxieties that European men had about women.
So they couldn't imagine a woman willingly choosing to die in her husband's pyre.
Right.
Unless she was being coerced or...
Yeah, or she was covering up some crime.
Hiding something.
Okay. Exactly.
It also reflects this whole fascination in Europe at the time with female poisoners.
Oh, totally.
You know, figures like Hieronyma Spara in Rome, accused of poisoning hundreds of people.
Right.
So it was like they projected their own fears onto Indian culture.
And saw a connection where there wasn't one.
And this all brings us back to the main point of Banerjee's book.
What's that?
That these travelers, they weren't objective observers.
No.
They were looking at Sati through the lens of their own culture.
Their own anxieties, their own fears and desires.
So it's not just a clash of cultures.
Right.
It's a clash of perspectives.
Absolutely. They were trying to solve a puzzle, but with all the wrong pieces.
It's like they were so focused on this idea of female behavior.
Right, and trying to fit Sati into that framework.
Yeah.
That they missed the bigger picture completely.
And that bigger picture, as Banerjee says, is all about power and control.
Absolutely.
And how cultures create these narratives to justify their own beliefs and practices.
Yeah, it's fascinating how these travelers tried to make Sati more palatable for their audience back in Europe.
So they're trying to kind of sell this idea of a good kind of widow burning.
The good Sati.
Yeah. So how do they do that?
Well, think about the illustrations that often went along with these travelogues. You see these elaborate processions with musicians and crowds of people. The widow is often depicted as beautiful, serene, almost angelic.
Wow.
Willingly sacrificing herself for love.
It's such a contrast to those written accounts where they're describing it as barbaric and demonic.
Exactly. It's like they couldn't reconcile these two opposing views.
Right.
And that tension, I think, speaks to those anxieties they were grappling with. On the one hand, they were fascinated by this idea of female devotion.
Okay.
This willingness to sacrifice everything for a man. But on the other hand, they were terrified of what that meant.
What if European women got any ideas?
Right, exactly.
So they kind of create this romanticized version to distance themselves from the parts they found disturbing.
Absolutely, to make it seem less threatening to their own social order.
So they could have it both ways.
Yeah.
Condemn Sati as this barbaric thing.
Right.
But at the same time, admire the widow's courage and devotion.
Totally. It's like wanting to have your cake and eat it too.
But not everyone bought into that romanticized version, right?
Oh, of course not. Some travelers were very critical of the whole practice. They saw Sati as this horrific form of oppression. A testament to the patriarchy that kept women subjugated.
So they saw it as murder disguised as religious devotion?
Exactly.
But then how did they explain the widows who willingly participated?
Right, because if it was truly oppressive, why would they choose to do that? It's a question that a lot of people struggled with. Some argued that the widows were brainwashed, basically. Indoctrinated to believe that their only purpose was to serve their husbands.
Even in death?
Yeah, even in death.
Wow.
Others suggested that they were coerced, pressured by their families or society to conform to this tradition.
So even in their criticism, they still focused on the women's motivations.
Right.
Rather than the bigger social and cultural forces.
Exactly. And that's something that Banerjee emphasizes throughout the book. These travelers, whether they were condemning Sati or romanticizing it, they were still looking at it through their own lens.
Okay.
A lens shaped by their own cultural anxieties and their understanding of gender roles.
Trying to fit a square peg into a round hole.
Exactly. Trying to impose their own framework onto a practice that was rooted in a completely different cultural context.
And that brings us to another interesting part of Banerjee's analysis. She argues that these travelers were particularly fixated on the Sati widow's silence.
Their silence.
Especially in their final moments.
Interesting.
So what's so important about that?
Well, remember what we were talking about, this European obsession with disorderly women?
Right.
Women who spoke out of turn, who challenged authority.
They were seen as a threat.
A threat, exactly.
As they were supposed to be.
Silent, submissive, obedient.
Right.
Banerjee suggests that this preoccupation with the widow's silence might reveal an even deeper anxiety about the power of female speech.
What if they spoke out against the ritual?
Right. What if they denounced their families, their society, their religion?
So by focusing on their silence, they were silencing them.
Exactly. Erasing any possibility of dissent or resistance.
Denying them agency.
Yes, even in death.
That's a chilling thought.
It is. And it's a reminder of how important it is to listen to those silenced voices.
Right.
Try to understand history from multiple perspectives.
But how do we do that?
It's a tough question.
Yeah.
But Banerjee encourages us to do it.
Yeah.
She says we need to approach these historical accounts with a critical eye, to question our own assumptions, and to be aware of the biases that we bring to our understanding of the past.
So it's not about dismissing these travelers' accounts completely.
No.
But reading them with a healthy dose of skepticism.
Yeah.
And considering alternative interpretations.
Exactly. And that's where the real power of Banerjee's book lies.
Okay.
It challenges us to rethink our assumptions about history and culture.
Okay.
And how we create narratives to understand the world.
It reminds us that history isn't just a collection of facts.
Right.
It's a tapestry of perspectives.
And often woven together with power, prejudice, and misunderstanding.
It's like we're peeling back the layers of an onion.
Exactly.
Revealing all the complexities and contradictions underneath. Banerjee takes this one specific practice, Sati, and uses it to illuminate these anxieties about women.
Right.
And power.
Yeah. That were all over European society at the time.
It's like she's holding a mirror up to them.
Right. Forcing them to confront their own prejudices and fears.
And what's interesting is how these anxieties were tied to the legal and social structures of the time.
For sure.
So think about the legal status of women in early modern Europe.
Okay.
They were essentially defined by their relationships to men.
Exactly.
Whether it was a daughter, wife, or widow.
Right. Their rights were limited. Their freedoms were curtailed.
Yeah.
It's not surprising that they were seen as a potential threat.
A threat to the established order.
To the patriarchy.
And if a woman stepped outside of those boundaries, challenged that structure.
She was labeled as disorderly.
And that could have some serious consequences.
Oh, yeah.
Imprisonment, public humiliation, even death.
It's a reminder of how deep those anxieties ran.
And it helps us understand why that Sati ritual was so unsettling.
Because it defied those gender roles.
Right.
They saw the widow choosing to burn as the ultimate transgression.
She's choosing death over life, defying the natural order.
And doing it in this very public way.
So it was like a direct challenge.
Yeah, to everything they believed in.
They had to find a way to explain it.
Right, categorize her, fit her into their understanding.
And that's where the narratives of witchcraft come in.
Yeah, the poisoned husbands, the romantic martyrdom.
They were grappling with something that challenged their worldview.
Absolutely, trying to make sense of the unexplainable.
But Banerjee's book doesn't just deconstruct those narratives.
No.
She asks us to think about alternative perspectives.
To hear the silenced voices.
Right, to understand the ritual on its own terms.
It's not easy.
But it's important.
Essential if we want to move beyond those simplistic and often dehumanizing narratives.
So what are some of those alternative perspectives?
Well, for one thing, we have to recognize that Sati wasn't a monolithic practice. There were many different motivations and experiences among the women who participated.
Some might have been coerced.
Right.
Some felt a sense of duty or devotion.
Others might have seen it as an escape.
Escape from a life of poverty or oppression.
Yeah.
And we don't have access to those women's inner thoughts.
No, we can only speculate.
But by acknowledging that complexity and resisting the urge to simplify or romanticize, we can at least try to approach those silenced voices with more empathy and respect.
Exactly. And in doing so, maybe we can learn something about ourselves.
About how we create narratives and the dangers of projecting our own ideas onto others. It's a powerful message.
It is.
And one that goes beyond the specific historical context of Sati.
For sure, it reminds us that history is not just about facts.
It's about perspective.
And power and prejudice and misunderstanding.
And it's up to us to untangle it all.
Yeah.
To listen to the silenced voices and challenge those narratives.
Absolutely. It's tough, but essential.
If we want a more just and equitable future.
I agree with that.
Burning Women.
Yeah.
It's one of those books that sticks with you.
It makes you question your assumptions.
And confront your biases.
And ultimately see the world differently.
So we encourage you to check it out.
Burning Women by Pompa Banerjee.
It will challenge you, provoke you.
And hopefully give you a deeper understanding of the complexities of being human.
And if you enjoyed this deep dive, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Book Reviews One.
We'll have more thought-provoking discussions for you.
Keep reading, keep thinking, and keep exploring.